Hey there, language learners. You know that feeling when you just want to like totally conquer English?
Yeah.
Especially out in the real world.
Yeah, totally.
Well, today we are diving deep into how you can actually use something we all encounter every day, the news, to improve your English listening and speaking no matter what level you're at.
Yeah.
And to help us go like way beyond those boring textbook exercises, we found this super cool podcast.
Oh, nice.
That's all about using the news to like level up your language skills.
Yeah, I mean, what's so cool about it to me is that the news is like this constant stream of authentic English, you know?
Totally. Yeah.
It's not slowed down or anything. Yeah. It's just real people talking about real stuff.
Yeah.
And it covers like everything you could think of.
Yeah. You know, I've actually never really thought of the news as a learning tool.
Mm-hmm.
But what is it about the news that makes it so effective for picking up new language skills?
Well, for me, I think it's all about that like real world exposure. You know, you're not getting like simplified language or anything.
Right.
You're hearing how people actually talk.
Right.
And that helps you learn like natural sentence structures and pick up all those idioms that native speakers use.
So it's kind of like being dropped right into the heart of an English conversation.
Exactly. And you know what else is great?
What?
Repetition.
Oh, yeah.
Like you hear the same words and phrases over and over again throughout the day, which really helps them stick in your brain.
That makes sense. Like how we learned our first language.
Totally.
Just constant exposure.
Yeah.
But I'm guessing choosing the right news source is pretty important.
Oh, for sure.
I mean, like jumping straight into CNN would probably be a bit much for a beginner, wouldn't it?
Yeah, totally. It's like choosing the right weight at the gym.
Yeah.
You don't want to start with something too heavy.
Right.
You got to find that sweet spot that challenges you but doesn't like totally overwhelm you.
Okay, so what are some of the recommendations that this podcast gives for different levels?
Well, for beginners, they recommend starting with podcasts that are actually made for language learners.
Okay.
Like News in Slow English or the BBC 6-Minute English.
Yeah.
Those use simplified language and they speak really slowly.
Okay.
So it's easy to follow along.
Those sound perfect for getting your feet wet.
Yeah.
What about for intermediate learners?
They suggest NPR podcasts.
Yep.
They cover a huge range of topics from politics to culture.
Yeah.
And the hosts speak super clearly and use a more like sophisticated vocabulary.
Nice, a definite step up.
Yeah.
And for those who are ready to tackle the big leagues.
Then it's time to dive into CNN, BBC News, or even like your local news channels.
Awesome.
That's where you'll hear those rapid fire deliveries and really complex vocabulary.
Okay, so we've got our news sources figured out. But how do we actually get the most out of each story?
Well, this podcast has 6 steps that they recommend for like really analyzing a news story.
Okay, all right.
The first one might sound obvious, but it's to identify the main topic.
Okay.
Like, what is the story actually about?
Right.
This helps you cut through all the noise and focus on the core message.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, so then step 2,
Yeah.
you listen for those essential facts. You know, the 5 W's and 1 H.
Oh, wait.
Who, what, when, where, why, and how.
Classic.
Yeah. Once you've got those down, you have a solid understanding of like the basic framework of the story.
Okay, cool. So we've identified the main topic.
Yeah.
We've figured out the key facts.
Yeah.
What's next?
This one is especially helpful for language learners. Pay attention to repeated information.
Oh, interesting.
You'll notice that they often rephrase the main points throughout the story.
Uh-huh.
It's like a built-in review session
Okay.
that helps you solidify your understanding, and it exposes you to synonyms for different words.
That's brilliant. Yeah, because sometimes I feel like I get so caught up in trying to catch every single word
Right?
that I miss the bigger picture.
Right. Exactly. So don't worry too much about catching everything the first time around.
Okay.
Just listen for those key points and how they're repeated.
Awesome. What's step 4?
Step 4 is all about becoming a vocabulary detective.
I love that.
You're going to come across words you don't know.
Huh?
But instead of running to the dictionary every time,
Yeah.
try using context clues.
Okay.
This podcast really stresses how important this is.
So basically like those little hints that are sprinkled throughout the sentence or the surrounding sentence,
Exactly.
like give us clues about what the word means.
Exactly. Like, let's say you hear the word legislation and you're not sure what it means,
Uh-huh.
but the story is about the government passing new laws.
Okay.
You can kind of figure out that legislation has something to do with that process.
Oh, okay. So we're using our detective skills
Totally.
to figure out the meaning.
Uh-huh.
I like, what's step 5?
This is where we tap into those visual and audio cues.
Oh, okay.
Especially if you're watching the news on TV. Like images, videos, and even the tone of the anchor's voice can add so much meaning to the story.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Like, think about a report on like a natural disaster.
Right.
Those images immediately give you a deeper understanding,
Totally.
even if you don't catch all the words.
Yeah, and the anchor's tone tells you so much too, like whether it's serious or urgent or hopeful.
Yeah, you can feel it.
Exactly. And then step 6,
Okay.
which is super important, is to take some time to reflect on what you've learned. Like, can you summarize the main points in your own words?
Right.
What new vocabulary did you pick up?
Yeah.
Jotting down some notes can be really helpful here.
It's like creating your own little study guide.
Totally.
And then if you're feeling ambitious, you can even listen to the same story again later.
And see how much more you understand.
Yeah, like a second pass.
Yeah, exactly. Repetition is key.
Okay, so we've covered why news is so awesome for language learning. We've talked about how to choose the right sources and how to really break down a story for maximum learning.
Right.
But now it's time to get to the really interesting part.
Ooh, I like where this is going.
So tell me what's next.
It's all about going beyond just understanding the news and actually using it to improve your speaking skills.
Yes, that's what I'm talking about. Time to level up from listener to speaker.
You got it.
Because let's be real, being able to talk about current events is where your fluency and confidence really shine.
Absolutely. Speaking is where you put all that listening practice into action. It's like learning to play an instrument.
Okay.
First you listen to the music.
Yeah.
Then you start creating your own.
Okay. I'm excited. How do we turn those news nuggets into spoken gold? Spill the tea.
Okay, first up, we've got the power of summarizing.
Okay.
After you listen to a news story, try retelling it in your own words out loud.
Okay.
You can do this solo.
Yeah.
Or even better with a language partner.
Oh, fun.
It's like you're your own little news anchor.
I love that.
Practicing condensing information and expressing it clearly.
And the key here is to like paraphrase right.
Exactly.
Not just repeat the exact words from the broadcast.
Yeah, you want to process the information and make it your own.
Find your own voice.
Right.
Okay, so summarizing is a great way to practice. What else?
Next up, we've got discussion.
Ooh.
Talking to other people about the news you've been consuming.
Yeah.
It's a fantastic way to practice speaking in a more dynamic way.
I like that. Yeah, because it's turning news into a social activity.
Totally.
And it pushes you to not just understand the information, but also to formulate your own opinions and express them.
Exactly. Like, let's say you're talking about a news story about a new law.
Okay.
You could summarize it in your own words and then ask your partner, what are your thoughts on this?
Boom. Conversation started.
Exactly.
I feel the English flowing already.
It's real world communication.
Yeah.
You're exchanging ideas, asking questions, responding naturally.
It's not just about learning the words.
Right.
It's about learning how to use them.
Exactly.
To interact with others. This is awesome. What other speaking activities can we try?
If you really want to challenge yourself,
Yeah.
try debating.
Ooh.
A mental workout for your English speaking abilities.
Debate night. I'm so in.
It's fun.
Yeah. This sounds like a really fun way to practice
Yeah.
thinking critically, structuring arguments.
Yeah. Maybe even persuading someone to see your side of things.
Totally. And it's got to be good for mastering all those persuasive language techniques.
For sure, you learn how to counter arguments respectfully, how to think on your feet, and how to express yourself with conviction.
You know, one thing I struggle with is like self-critique. How can I track my progress
Yeah.
and see where I need to improve without being too hard on myself?
Great question.
Any tips from the podcast?
They recommend recording yourself.
Oh, okay.
It might feel a little awkward at first, but it's so valuable.
Okay.
After you've discussed or summarized a news story,
Yeah.
hit record, talk it out, and then listen back.
So it's like having your own personal speech coach.
Exactly. You can pinpoint areas where you might want to improve.
Right.
Like your pacing or your pronunciation, or even those filler words that we all use sometimes.
Yeah, totally. Like,
Exactly. Recording yourself gives you that objective feedback so you can really see how you're doing.
and track your progress over time.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm already feeling more confident just thinking about all these strategies.
That's great.
What other techniques does the podcast recommend for fine-tuning like pronunciation and overall speaking style?
One really effective technique is mimicking, also known as shadowing.
Okay.
Basically, you listen to a news broadcast and then you try to repeat exactly what the anchors say.
Okay.
Copying their tone, their pace, their pronunciation.
So you're like shadowing the experts.
Exactly.
Or being their natural rhythm and intonation.
It's a fantastic way to develop a more authentic sounding accent.
That's so cool. And if you're watching a video news broadcast,
Yeah.
you can even pay attention to their body language and facial expressions,
Oh, yeah, for sure.
which is a whole other level of immersion.
Totally. It's not just about the words, it's about how they're delivered.
Right. And how those nonverbal cues add to the message.
Exactly.
Okay. So mimicking or shadowing is a great technique. What else?
All right. For those who love a creative challenge, the podcast suggests this fun activity.
Okay.
After you listen to a news story, pretend you're a news reporter and write your own version of it,
Oh, wow.
and then practice presenting it out loud like you're on the news.
I love that.
It's a fun way to practice structuring information clearly and logically.
It's like turning news into a writing and speaking game.
Totally.
And if you're feeling really ambitious, you could even record your mock news report and share it with a friend or teacher for feedback.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm loving all these tips, but let's be real for a second.
Yeah.
Speaking a new language can be kind of scary.
Oh, for sure.
What does the podcast say about overcoming those nerves and building confidence?
They emphasize that making mistakes is like a crucial part of the process.
Okay.
Don't be afraid to stumble or mispronounce a word. The more you practice, the more comfortable you'll become.
It's all about progress, not perfection.
Exactly.
And remembering that we're all in this together,
Totally.
cheering each other on as we try to become better communicators.
Yeah.
Well, this has been a fantastic deep dive into the world of using news to level up your English.
Yeah, it has.
I'm feeling so inspired to turn on the news right now and start putting all these strategies into practice.
I know, me too.
This is awesome. Before we wrap up, any final words of wisdom for our listeners?
Yeah, the key takeaway here is that the news isn't just information. It's a powerful tool for mastering English
Okay.
by actively engaging with it.
Yeah.
You're not just staying informed. You're constantly learning, growing, and expanding your linguistic horizons.
The news is our gateway to language mastery.
I love that.
It's accessible. It's engaging.
Yeah,
And it's constantly evolving.
Right.
So there are always new opportunities for learning.
exactly.
Before we sign off, any final thought-provoking questions or ideas to leave our listeners pondering?
Yeah, here's one from the podcast.
Okay.
As you get better at English, how does your understanding of the news change?
Oh, that's interesting.
Do you start to notice different perspectives?
Yeah.
Maybe even biases that you didn't pick up on before?
Wow, that's a great point.
Yeah.
It's like you're challenging us to not just become better speakers, but also more critical thinkers.
Exactly.
Because language and information are so intertwined.
They are.
The better you can navigate the world of English.
Yeah.
The deeper your understanding of what's happening in the world becomes.
Totally.
It's a continuous journey of learning growth and discovery with the news as our guide.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
I'm so glad we took this deep dive together.
Me too.
It's totally changed my perspective on language learning.
Yeah, I think there's something really special about connecting language acquisition to real world events.
For sure.
It makes it so much more engaging and meaningful.
Absolutely. And it reminds us that language is so much more than just grammar and vocabulary. It's a tool for understanding the world.
Yeah,
And for connecting with others
totally.
on a deeper level.
Yeah.
Speaking of connecting with others, I'm curious to hear what stood out to you the most from this podcast. What strategies are you excited to try out?
Well, I'm definitely going to start using those 6 steps for analyzing news stories.
Yeah?
I think it'll really help me focus my listening and make sure I'm getting the most important information.
That's a great choice. Those steps are like a roadmap to help you navigate even the most complicated news.
Totally.
And I'm really excited to try the shadowing technique.
Oh, yeah.
I think it'll be super helpful for improving my pronunciation and intonation.
It's a fantastic way to internalize all those little nuances of spoken English.
Yeah,
It's like having a personal coach guiding you to more natural and fluent speech.
exactly. And the podcast even mentioned paying attention to the anchor's body language and facial expressions, which is something I've never really focused on before.
Right.
But I can see how it would add a whole other layer of understanding.
It's all about immersing yourself in the language.
Yeah.
By observing not just what's being said,
Right.
but how it's being said.
Right.
You get a much richer understanding of the message.
It's like unlocking a secret code to fluency.
Totally.
And the best part is it's all available to us right now through the news. We don't need expensive textbooks or complicated software.
Nope.
Just a curious mind and a willingness to engage.
Exactly. That's the beauty of it.
Yeah.
The news is constantly evolving, so there's always something new to learn.
Yeah, it's a lifelong journey of discovery.
It is.
And it's one that we can all take together.
Absolutely.
I love that it's not about reaching some imaginary finish line.
Right.
It's about embracing the process and enjoying the ride.
Exactly.
Who knows? Maybe one day you'll be the one delivering the news,
Oh, wow.
inspiring others with your fluency and your insight. It's a goal worth striving for.
It is.
But even if we don't all become news anchors,
Yeah.
the skills we gain from engaging with the news are going to benefit us in so many ways.
Absolutely. From everyday conversations to professional presentations, being able to communicate clearly and confidently in English is a huge asset.
Totally. This deep dive has given me so much to think about.
Me too.
I'm feeling inspired and energized to take my English to the next level.
That's great to hear. Just remember, every step you take, no matter how small, brings you closer to your goals. So celebrate those wins and keep pushing yourself beyond your comfort zone.
You've given us so many practical strategies and words of encouragement.
Oh, thank you.
I think our listeners are going to be just as excited as I am to start putting these ideas into practice.
I hope so.
Learning a language should be enjoyable and rewarding.
It should.
And by using the news as our guide,
Yeah.
we can stay informed, engaged, and inspired along the way.
I love that.
Before we wrap up, I wanted to circle back to something you mentioned earlier.
Okay.
The idea that as our English gets better, we start to notice different perspectives and maybe even biases in the news.
Right.
That's such a fascinating concept.
It is.
I'm curious to hear your thoughts on how we can develop those critical thinking skills.
Well, I think it starts with recognizing that no news source is perfectly objective.
Okay.
Every outlet has its own agenda, its own way of framing stories, its own target audience.
So it's about becoming aware of those potential biases and learning to read between the lines.
Exactly. You got to ask yourself questions like, okay.
Who's telling the story? What's their perspective?
Yeah.
What information might be missing?
Those are such important questions to consider.
They are.
It reminds me of that saying, there are two sides to every story. Sometimes there are even more than two.
Exactly. By seeking out different perspectives and critically evaluating the information we're taking in, we can develop a much more nuanced understanding of the world.
It's like we're becoming detectives, piecing together the truth from all these different pieces of information.
I love that analogy.
And as our English improves, we get access to even more sources and perspectives.
All right.
We can read international newspapers, listen to podcasts from other countries, talk to people from all over the world.
It's amazing.
That's such a powerful reminder of how language opens doors
Does.
to new experiences and new ways of thinking. It's not just about communication.
Right.
It's about expanding our horizons
Yeah.
and becoming more informed global citizens. I couldn't have said it better myself.
So as you continue your English learning journey, remember to embrace curiosity,
Yeah.
critical thinking, and a thirst for knowledge.
The world is waiting to be explored,
It is.
and language is your passport.
Beautiful. I think we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
Yeah.
I'm so grateful for your insights
Thank you.
and for sharing this awesome podcast with us.
It was my pleasure.
Before we sign off, is there anything else you'd like to leave our listeners with?
Yeah, just remember that learning English is a journey, not a destination.
Okay.
There will be challenges,
Yeah.
but don't let them get you down.
Yeah.
Embrace the process.
Okay.
Celebrate your progress.
Yeah.
And never stop exploring the wonders of language.
Beautiful words. And I think that's a perfect note to end on.
Yeah.
To all our amazing listeners out there. Keep practicing.
Yes.
Stay curious. And never stop exploring the incredible world of English.
I love it.
We'll see you next time.
Bye.
It's been awesome diving into this with you. You know, what's cool to me is that using the news to learn English, you're not just like learning grammar and stuff.
Right.
You're actually using it to understand what's happening in the world.
Yeah, totally. It's like taking those language skills out for a spin in the real world.
Exactly. It's not just passive consumption. You're analyzing it, discussing it, even like creating your own stories based on what you've learned.
Yeah, it's a much more active way to learn.
Definitely.
And I think that's why it's so effective. It's engaging, it's relevant, and it could totally change how we think about both language learning and the news itself.
Totally. Speaking of change,
Yeah.
what's one thing you'll take away from this deep dive, like something you'll actually use in your own English learning?
Oh, easy. Those 6 steps for analyzing news stories.
Oh, yeah.
That's a game changer for me. It gives me a framework for tackling any news story, no matter how complicated,
Right.
and pulling out the key information.
It's a super valuable tool. Yeah.
And you can use it for so much more than just news, articles, podcasts, even TED Talks.
Okay.
It's a skill that'll help you in any part of life where you need to process information.
That makes sense. And I'm also going to try to have more conversations about current events.
Oh, nice.
It's such a good way to practice speaking naturally, to try out new vocabulary,
Yeah.
and to hear different perspectives.
Discussions are the best for that.
Yeah.
They're a really rich learning environment.
Totally.
And they help you develop those critical thinking skills too.
Right, because as you discuss different viewpoints, you start to question things,
Yeah.
challenge your own biases,
Right.
and ultimately form more informed opinions.
It's like you're training your mind to be more open, more curious,
Yeah.
more accepting of different ways of seeing the world.
And I think that's the ultimate goal of learning a language, right?
Totally.
To connect with people on a deeper level, to understand different cultures, and to make the world a more informed and compassionate place.
Beautiful. I couldn't have said it better myself.
This deep dive has not only given us practical strategies for improving our English,
Right.
but it's also inspired us to become more engaged global citizens.
I agree. I want to thank you and all our listeners for joining us on this journey.
Yeah, thanks for being here, everyone.
Keep exploring, keep practicing, and never stop being curious about the world.
Great advice. So we talked about how the news can help us level up our English, but I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier
Okay.
about how as we get better at English,
Yeah.
we start to notice different perspectives
Yeah.
and maybe even biases in the news.
It's true.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
How can we develop that critical thinking muscle?
Well, I think step 1 is realizing that no news source is completely unbiased.
Okay.
Every outlet has its own agenda, its own way of presenting stories,
Right.
its own target audience.
So it's about being aware of those potential biases and learning to read between the lines.
Exactly. You got to ask yourself,
Okay.
who's telling this story? What's their perspective?
Yeah.
Is there anything missing?
Those are important questions. Like that's it. There are 2 sides to every story, and sometimes even more than 2.
Exactly. By seeking out different perspectives
Okay.
and really thinking about the information we're getting,
Yeah.
we can understand the world in a much more nuanced way.
It's like we're detectives piecing together the truth
I love that.
for all these different clues.
Yeah, and as our English gets better, we have access to even more sources and perspectives.
Right. Like we can read newspapers from other countries,
Totally.
listen to podcasts from around the world, talk to people from all walks of life.
It's amazing how language opens up those doors.
It really does. It's not just about communication.
Right.
It's about expanding our worldview
Yeah.
and becoming more informed citizens of the world.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
So as you continue on your English learning journey, remember to stay curious,
Yes.
think critically, and never stop learning.
The world is out there waiting for you.
It is.
And language is your key.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful thought. I think we've covered a lot today.
We have.
I'm so grateful for your insights
Thank you.
and for sharing this amazing podcast with us.
It was my pleasure.
Before we wrap up, any final words of wisdom for our listeners?
Remember, learning English is a journey, not a race.
Okay.
There will be bumps along the way, but don't let them discourage you.
Yeah.
Enjoy the process.
Okay.
Celebrate your wins and keep exploring the magic of language.
What a great reminder. And I think that's a perfect place to leave it.
It is.
So all our incredible listeners out there,
Yeah.
keep practicing, keep learning, and keep exploring the amazing world of English.
Love it. This has been awesome. I love talking about this stuff with you. It's so cool how using the news to learn English, you're like connecting with the world around you.
Yeah. Right. It's not just about like memorizing verb tenses and stuff.
Exactly. It's about actually using language to understand things and to connect with other people.
Yeah. And it turns something we might usually just passively consume into this active learning experience.
Totally.
You're analyzing it, discussing it, creating your own take on what you've learned.
It's so much more engaging that way.
It is, and I think that's what makes this approach so powerful. It changes how we see both language learning and the news itself.
For sure. Speaking of change,
Yeah.
what's one thing you'll take away from all this and actually use in your own English learning journey?
Oh man, so many good things. But I think the one that's going to stick with me is those 6 steps for analyzing news stories.
Oh, yeah.
That's a game changer for me. It gives me a way to approach any news story, no matter how complex it is, and pull out the important stuff.
It's a really useful skill.
It is.
And you can use it for more than just news articles.
Oh yeah? Like what?
Think about using those steps for podcasts or even TED Talks. Anything where you need to really understand the information.
That makes sense. And I'm also going to try to have more conversations about current events. It's just such a great way to practice speaking naturally. Try out new words.
Yeah.
And hear different opinions.
Discussions are the best for that.
They're like this awesome learning environment.
Totally.
And you're building those critical thinking skills at the same time.
Right, because as you talk about different viewpoints, you start to question your assumptions and maybe challenge some of your own biases.
Right.
And you end up with a more informed opinion.
It's like training your brain to be more open, more curious, more accepting of different ways of seeing things.
And I think that's what learning a language is all about, right? Is
Absolutely.
connecting with people on a deeper level, understanding other cultures,
Yeah.
and making the world a better place.
Beautifully said. I couldn't agree more.
This deep dive has given us so much to think about.
It's inspired us to become more engaged global citizens.
I love that. And on that note, I want to thank you and all of our listeners for joining us on this journey.
Yeah, thanks for being here, everyone.
Keep exploring, keep practicing, and never stop being curious about the world.
Such great advice. Well, I think we've come to the end of our deep dive.
We have.
It's been so much fun exploring this topic with you.
Likewise, I've really enjoyed it.
To all our awesome listeners out there, keep learning, keep practicing, and never stop exploring the amazing world of English. Thanks for listening to the Speak Smart podcast, and subscribe my channel, like the hit button.